What does airlines disasters and shipping disasters have in common? Something that the shipping industry can learn from the airplane disasters of old is something called crew management systems. We're going to talk about it in this episode. Let's start with the culture that's on board the ships. Ships have a captain, they have a first officer, and they have a hierarchy system. The captain rule is law. The captain is the foremost authority legally and morally speaking. What has happened in the past is that captains, for instance, during a certain Concosta disaster, the ferry that sank partially in Italy, the captain, for instance, abandoned the ship and was chewed out by the Coast Guard. He was found guilty and is now serving close to 20 years in prison for both manslaughter and abandoning his duties as a captain. Well, the thing is, if you look at the hierarchies, the captain is the supreme ruler, if you will, and every other service person under them has a ranking system from first mate to chief purser and so on, who have a role, have a point in this hierarchy of command. So when the captain makes a decision that is foolhardy and, should we say, can cause a potential disaster, such as a certain ship that hit the El Gioro, which happened back in 2015. What ended up happening was the ship went into a hurricane, sank, 33 plus lives were lost, and what was found from the NTSB, which is the American National Transport Safety Board, finding was that the captain made a bad decision. The captain and the crew were bickering. There was a lot of complaints that the captain was making a foolhardy decision. The captain just brushed it off and said, "We're going into the storm." He brushed it off and the hurricane sank the ship. The ship went down and many lives were lost. What ended up happening is, back in the 90s and so on, was that there was a rush, if you will, a fundamental change in the way that the airplane industry was looking at, well, the airline industry, both transport and cargo, in how to manage risk. So there was an increase in technology, and there was a revolutionary, should we say, change in the leadership culture of the airplane systems. And so what they ended up creating was the crew management system. So what you end up having is this crew management system is a change in the hierarchy, the way that things are handled. The captain of the airplane is still in charge and legally, morally, all that, but they now have a more resource management type system where input is brought in from the crew to the captain, and decisions are, shall we say, made more informedly. So the first mate or the deputy pilot or the second pilot, co-pilot, whatever you want to call them, might end up seeing something that the main pilot might not see. And so because this happens, the input is generated while the flight is going to be taken care of in flight, before flight, and after flight. There is a steady process of input at all times. The captain is legally and morally required to get the input from his crew if there are problems, or if they're seeing something that needs to be done, or say an issue that needs to be addressed, they bring it up, or the captain asks for input. And this kind of mutual decision making has changed. Well, the crew management system has resulted in almost zero casualties from, say, human error, because there has been this radical change in the airplane industry. Okay, so we've covered how the airline industry brought in this crew management system. Well, a similar idea was then brought in for the ship industry. So this was a bridge management system. The problems that you end up seeing is that it was brought in the 90s, and it hasn't really been updated with the times. We're now in the 2020s, and yet we continue to see one glaring problem. Almost every decade since the 90s, we're averaging 100 large ships. That's, say, million barrel tankers to or like the 20,000 TCU type bulk haulers, or like these are the transport carriers, or the transport container units. So they call them TCUs. These are like the Ever Given is a 20,000 TCU rated ship. The problem is that every decade, almost 100 of these large-sized containers ships and bulk carriers and fuel tankers and so on are being lost. And a lot of it is being found down to human error, weather, or technical failure. The problem is that right now in the shipping industry, there are three major problems that have now been identified. aging ships, ships that do not have the modern technology or say are up to standard, and the international flags of convenience. And a fourth one that probably is just as important but a little bit lower is the language that is spoken inside the ships. Taking just the language issue. And oftentimes when you look at the ever given, that ship had a crew. The pilots and the people that were in the bridge who were speaking one language, the crew, the 25 plus members, were Indian nationals who spoke probably either Tamil, Hindi, whatever the language that they were speaking of India. And the problem is there's oftentimes no universal language or a basic common language to speak. So there's one issue, linguistics. The second issue is the ship itself. The Never Forgiven, Ever Given, is a more modern ship. It has more of the safety features. It has more of an integrated control system so that if there's a problem in the engine room, it shows up in the bridge. But older ships, older bulk carriers, older shipping container type ships end up having problems where if there's a problem going on in the engine room, the bridge doesn't know about it unless the bridge contacts the engine room to get the update as to what's going on. So the technology is based on the more modern ships, but you have a problem that not all these ships are up to spec. So you have the crew management system from the airline industry. Now we have what's called the bridge management system in the shipping industry. And the problem that's now come up are many. But to start with, they tried to adopt what was brought in from the airline industry. But that was back in the 90s. And yet, if you look at what's happening, almost 100 ships every decade of varying sizes from, say, the 20,000 TCU type, that's the transport container units. That's like what the Never Forgiven carries, the Ever Given, or say bulk haulers or fuel haulers. These are, say, the 1 million barrel type haulers of bulk crude oil. You're seeing on average 100 major ships lost a decade. And when you look at recent stats, in 2018 there was 41 large-scale container and or bulk haulers lost. In 2019 it rose to 49. So all these ships continue to get lost. And according to many of the experts, this comes down to a human issue. Because if we look at the El Faro, which in 2015 was a bulk hauler that decided to go into a storm, it was a hurricane that was raging in the Caribbean, the ship went in and it went down. 33 lives were lost, and when they were able to find the ship in question, they were able to find where the black box was. I don't think they were able to recover any of the bodies to their next of kin. My condolences. But the problem that was identified was that the ship's captain disregarded any of the input from the staff or the senior bridge staff and just decided to go into it anyway because he didn't think it was such a big deal. Unfortunately, that big deal cost 33 lives. So what you end up having are a number of problems. One, the bridge management system is facing serious problems because of the fact that it was made in the 90s. It has not been updated. There's a variety of reasons for this. So what are some of the issues? Well, there's the hierarchy. You still have this outdated system of leadership on board. The captain is the legal and moral responsible person to carry out the orders. His or her rule is law. Ship captains generally and all of the hierarchy of the ship have been called into question because often good captains will take the input from their crew, but oftentimes, as you can see, many decisions are made on bad captains or on bad leadership. Another issue is that the industry is run by economics. So unless, say, all of the shipping companies all are universally pressed to get into and adopt and change their system, you're not going to see any significant changes because one company is not going to implement a potentially costly retrograde of their ships, training and so on with their staff and crew if their competitors are not doing it. It's going to cut into the profit margins and there's no motivation. So there's that. The other thing is you also have the crews. What about these crews? Well, and a lot of the times when you look at the airplane model, the reason why the crew management system is so much easier to deal with is that you're dealing with less numbers of crew. At most, the most staffed, say, jumbo jet, like one of the new 777s, might have up to 40 people, but generally speaking, almost all of them will have some functional level of English. In the airline industry, the standard lingua franca, the linguistics, the language of choice is English. But in the shipping industry, when you have, say, crews that are, say, Italian, Indian, and Sri Lankan, or Pakistani, or Chinese, when you have all of these multinational crews, a lot of people do not speak the same language. So you're going to have, say, a captain who could speak English, but his first mate might speak French. But you end up having linguistic barriers. So communication of, say, you have a shipper or a staff, like a lowly crewman, who all of a sudden is on the lowest hierarchy, but he knows that ship or she knows that ship better than anybody, and all of a sudden notices that there's a problem. They try to communicate, but they can't speak a language to a senior officer. So you start seeing the language barrier. Another thing is the international side of things. Because so many ships right now fly under a flag of convenience, it's often only because, say, that flag of convenience country such as Liberia or the Bahamas or wherever they're flagged consents to, say, the NTSB to carry out an investigation on their behalf. Well, by legal standards, it is the flag of convenience country that is supposed to investigate any accidents that happen in the international waters. If it happens, say, within the coastal waters of the host country where the ship is coming or is transiting through, that's a different story. Then such countries such as Indonesia or Singapore or South Korea, Japan, Canada, America, what have you, can then institute an investigation. So solutions. What can we do to prevent so much loss of both product in the shipping container industry, oil spills, and the like? Well, you already have a brilliant solution already in play. It's called the bridge management system. But let's work out the kinks. Some of the problems that the bridge management system, that when it was brought in, it was a really good system, but they didn't really fill in some gaps. One, there's the language issue. So this is a key staffing concern. Either staff a captain and command crew that can speak the same language as the majority of your regular crew, or at least make sure that there's a designated chain of communication that either speaks English, French, Tagalog, whatever the main language will be agreed upon before the ship goes off, so that if there are problems, each of the individual crew members can at least speak to the one designated person in that communication chain that can then bring it up to the bridge staff and to the captain. Next, get away from the hierarchy, but change the system of hierarchy so that it's no longer so dependent on just one person, male or female. So change the hierarchy system so that the leadership model is more fluid. Yes, the captain will still be the end result, but the captain must be legally obliged, and this is the big thing, is change the hierarchy so that there is a more legal imperative and legal requirement for the captain to get more input, so that if, say, there is something that's been spotted and they make the same bad choice, they are now legally required and will be legally responsible to justify why they took the actions they did. But the thing is, when you have captains who are now morally and legally required to respond to crew suggestions, comments, concerns, it may be the oomph that is needed to get these problems stopped before they become problems. Update the bridge management system from the 90s and bring it to a more 2020 methodology. We've now had so many years in the airline industry. Take some lessons from the airline industry and change the way that things are being done at the bridge level. What does this mean? It means more communication training. It means the establishment of the lingua franca, or the more standard ship-specific language of choice, so on. But get the training into this cruise so that there is more of a push to, well, be able to communicate with each other. The next thing is put the investment in the ships so that there is a more communicated or more alert-based system, so that if, say, there is a mechanical problem, say if there is more errant weather, if there is conditions that could be problematic, that it is more and quicker communicated to the bridge. This is where international and local laws need to be brought into place. So while America, say, could bring in these kinds of systems and require the ships and all that to be brought up to a standard that could be the new international norm, unless every other country and international treaties are brought in to enforce this, it's not going to be, it won't mean much. Sure, in America, you may see a reduction in shipping disasters. So the thing is that there must be an international equation to this. So this is where the International Treaty on Shipping, the international shipping organizations, both the commercial ones, so these are all the shippers themselves, or the international treaty under the UN could be brought in to update, upgrade, and force this. Because if it's forced, the economic issue that was brought in before, if it's forced on everybody, everyone's going to do it. So it's not going to be ignored by whatever, say, ABC shipping, because now everybody's got to. These are some of the solutions. It's going to be local laws, it's going to be international cooperation, it's going to be holistic culture change, and it's going to be a linguistic change that's going to probably result in less disasters or less loss of life when you have a large shipping container ship with 30 plus sailors who will never see their families again. This is dangerbydegrees. That's it. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we now have our own website. You can visit, share, subscribe. We're also on YouTube. We're going to have our own blog soon. All of this is going to be available. Share with us, join with us. Let's make these videos viral in a good way, not in a bad way, like a certain virus we don't want to talk about. See you then.